Syracuse women's basketball hasn't had the best time in ACC play, sporting a 4-12 record after today's 80-49 loss to Duke. Yikes. Yeah, you heard me right. That's a 31-point loss in a season which has not been pretty thus far. But we knew SU had a tough challenge in front of them, and we're here to evaluate the results. It's Orange Press Pass, and the fun begins right now. Welcome inside our CitrusTV studios for this women's basketball edition of Orange Press Pass alongside Jish, Sokolsky, and Purvis. I'm Srikar, Rajendran. Now, Syracuse women's basketball with a big loss to Duke, 80-49 to be exact. Now, fellas, it's been much of the same for this team, but Jish, what are your first thoughts after this one?
You know, Srikar, I came into this matchup with low expectations, but holy cow. My expectations not only were not met, but I didn't see really any fight from this Syracuse team after last year's 58-45 loss, in which they also forced Duke to shoot poorly. Not the case today. Syracuse was outplayed in all facets, and in my opinion, this might have been the worst loss of the year.
Well, Jish, my first thought is that this team simply has no margin for error. Duke shot 43% from the field, Syracuse just 29%, and Felicia Legette-Jack and this team, they just do not have the talent to overcome a bad shooting day. Duke was the more physical team. They were better on the boards. They got out and outran Syracuse in transition today.
Now, to paint the picture of just how ugly this game was for SU, it's not enough for me to just sit here and discuss. We actually have to see what happened. So let's go full eyes and ears inside Cameron Indoor for what was a big lopsided affair. But it didn't really start out that way. It started out with some buckets from Kyra Wood, who was inside, a nice pass there, and the layup is good. Now, look, it really does get a little bit better for Duke after this, but some hustle there, and a three-pointer for Sophie Burrows is good. She had 13 in this one, looking really good, but Duke always had a response. On the other end, that's Taina Mayer from the corner, hits the three. And after the first quarter, things got a little bit out of control. That's Aluchi Okananwa with the layup. Jish, Duke really broke this game open.
Absolutely. Syracuse just wasn't back on defense, even in situations like that. Not necessarily a transition situation, but when Syracuse lost the ball, it was struggling to sprint back on defense. Duke was finishing easy layups on the other end, and that's really what broke the game open for the Blue Devils.
And another thing that broke the game open for Duke was all the turnovers. 13 in the first half. Duke is going to be a team that will constantly capitalize on those opportunities, and they sure did. Look at the ball movement here. Three-pointer is good for Ashlyn Jackson, and at halftime, it is 41-19 Blue Devils running away with it. Cole, they would not let up, and the shooting, while it was not particularly good in the first half, did it get any better in the second?
It got a little bit better, but the truth is it was really too little too late for Syracuse. And as you mentioned, the turnovers were really the Achilles heel for the Orange today. Duke getting their hands in passing lanes, capitalizing on opportunities in transition. They were absolutely stifling all afternoon.
Stifling was the name of the game for the Blue Devils, ultimately coming away with an 80-49 win. Yes, again, this is a 31-point loss for Syracuse, a huge one, and one that will definitely be, not really a momentum jumper for this team in the slightest, Jish.
No, absolutely not. I mean, Syracuse has lost big earlier this season, I think, to the Boston College game. But this late in the season, with ACC tournament aspirations, you need to start stringing together some wins. You're kind of on the bubble of that. This is a step in the wrong direction, a gigantic leap backwards. Syracuse didn't really do much of anything that proved that they could contend in the ACC today.
And this is an unfortunate trend for Syracuse. We saw earlier this season a 40-plus point loss to Boston College, and then 31 points today. This team has been prone to be blown out by some of the better teams in the ACC all year, and that was just the case again today.
And speaking of full eyes and ears, as I mentioned before we looked at these highlights, here's a guy who had full eyes and ears inside Cameron Indoor. Tyler Aitken, ladies and gentlemen. Tyler, you're looking great. My question for you has to do with that turnover figure I was talking about earlier. 23 for the game, 13 in the first half. What did Coach Felicia Legette-Jack have to say about all those turnovers and giving away the ball, giving Duke more opportunities to score?
I mean, she really focused on how many issues Syracuse had feeding the ball inside. She particularly blamed Syracuse's premier two forwards, Isabel Verjao and Kyra Wood, just not catching the ball. She said they were in position, they did a good job fronting the defender, just couldn't catch the ball, gave it away, so she was very much not happy with that. And Carol Lawson, the head coach of Duke, pointed out that it's not like the Blue Devils tried anything different. They just played their normal style of defense, which is challenging the guard, giving them a tough angle to pass it inside and try to get some deflections. It was just super, super successful today for Duke. So the main issue was feeding it inside. Syracuse had a season low 14 points in the paint, so the Duke game plan definitely worked out.
Tyler, good to see you, my friend. Now, one of the bright spots for Syracuse today was Georgia Woolley. She led the team with 14 points, but earlier in the game, she kind of got a little dinged up coming down from a layup attempt. What did Coach Jack say about her status after the game? Is she good to go for the future?
I mean, Georgia Woolley took more than just one tumble throughout the game. At one point, she missed a three-point shot, was challenged by a defender, backed up into the stanchion right by the sideline. She almost fell into me, actually. So she hit the court multiple times, had to be helped off the court multiple times. After the game, I did ask Coach Jack, hey, how's Georgia Woolley doing? She okay? Coach said, yeah, she's fine, ready to go in the next one. No official injury, just was taking tumble after tumble, hit the ground hard a few times. She was limping, but she's doing just fine. So don't worry about her not playing against Pittsburgh or anything like that.
Hey, Tyler, good to see you. Let's look bigger picture for a second. This team has really struggled against some of the top opponents in the ACC this year, a loss to North Carolina the other day, and then a blowout against Duke today. Do you think these losses are just a product of a huge talent gap between Syracuse and the top teams in the ACC, or do you think at this point in the season, Felicia Leggett-Jack's crew has just simply mailed it in?
I mean, there's certainly a difference in talent when you look at some of the top teams in the ACC like Duke, like North Carolina, and when you look at Syracuse. There's no Deasia Fair. There's no one like Deasia Fair on this Syracuse team. No one on this team is going to be a top 10 scorer in college basketball history. So that's for certain. But Coach Leggett-Jack did let on at some points throughout the post-game press conference that she wasn't happy with everybody's effort, and she seemed to be specifically focusing on the veteran players on this team. When I was talking about earlier that some of the forwards weren't catching passes inside, she said, you might be just playing 2 or 3 more games of college basketball in your entire life. You have to leave it all out on the court. And she didn't say that her players didn't, but she said her team needs to focus on leaving it all out on the court, especially for those seniors, those grad students who won't be playing much going forward. So it might not be a concern for Coach Leggett-Jack, but it is a focus. She wants effort to be the focus over the last few games of the regular season and maybe the ACC tournament if Syracuse can even get there.
Thanks, Tyler. I mean, you're someone who always knows your stuff, and I'm glad you were able to show that once again. So thank you very much. Safe travels back to Syracuse. For us at the desk, though, it's time to go deeper into this game and see where it all went wrong for Syracuse. We'll be right back on Orange Press Pass. Welcome back to Orange Press Pass alongside Jish, Sokolsky, and Purvis. I'm Srikar, Rajendran, breaking down Syracuse women's basketball's 80-49 loss to number 11 Duke. Now, I want you to hone in on that number for a second. 49. That's pretty low, and a reason why it was so low, Jish, the shooting. It was awful today.
It's been kind of, we sound like broken records as Syracuse is breaking records with this shooting. I mean, when you're shooting only at 5 for 15 from deep, or should I say 6 for 17 from deep, you're not winning many basketball games if you think you have shooters. If Sophie Burrows and Georgia Woolley are on your team, they have to be making more shots than that. And really what I looked at, Cole, was the shot selection. Fadeaway threes in the corner. As Patrick Ewing once said, what kind of shot is that? You practice that shot? It doesn't look like Syracuse really practiced any of the shots they were taking. Duke's defense, you got to give it credit, it was phenomenal, but the shot selection really is what hampered the Orange today.
A lot of oh-no Valentine shots today, Jish, and this team, the graphic says it there, built it brick by brick. And I look at Georgia Woolley, a player who has been the star all year for Syracuse. It just looked like she was trying to do too much today with some of the shot selection. She was active early, scored the first 4 points of the game, but then got a little bit greedy and a couple of heat checks here and there. She's a player who has had to carry a big load this year with the lack of talent that Syracuse has, but some of the shots she took were a little bit head-scratching today.
No, they definitely were. And I think as a team, if you're not going to shoot the ball well, you would at least hope for better shot selection so you can get better looks, but it didn't seem that way either.
Srikar, they could probably use someone like you out there. I've seen you hoop in Barnes a little bit. You're taking good, smart shots, and that's what a Syracuse team has to do every time they're on the floor. It seems like this team does play with a lot of heart. I don't want to question that. But when it comes to shooting on the fly, I really think the Syracuse team needs to play with a little more IQ.
Well, fellas, another big reason why Syracuse lost, well, the turnovers. They came in bunches like cats in a laundry basket. Meow, if you know what I mean. But, Cole, 23 giveaways?
Yeah.
Not going to cut it.
I think it's a product of the Duke defense just being absolutely incredible. This Duke team is so disciplined defensively, getting hands into passing lanes. It's a team that plays good team defense. They're not built on filling it up offensively. They're a team that makes their money playing good defense, and that's why they're one of the top squads in the ACC. And you can see this has been a season-long trend for Felicia Leggett-Jack and her team all year. The turnovers just not showing a lot of discipline on the offensive side of the ball, Jish.
I mean, Duke is a great defensive team. You hit the nail on the head there, Cole. Doing a great job hedging off ball screens, getting in front of passing lanes, getting hands on balls. But if you look at that full screen you just saw there, Syracuse had double-digit turnovers in every ACC game this season. They're doing something to telegraph these passes, that they're not holding onto the ball that well. And this is an issue with Syracuse at the end of the day that you really can't gloss over and say, oh, well, they just played a good defensive team. Syracuse, in the coming future, has to limit turnovers if it wants any chance of winning and competing in the ACC, not just this year, but for years to come.
And you saw Duke doubling the ball all day and trapping Syracuse's ball handlers, and SU just does not have the experience to deal with that.
And also, in a good old-fashioned beatdown like this, the defense is always going to be a primary concern. Jish, I want to get your thoughts on the zone defense specifically. Just like McLovin from Superbad, does this team need an identity switch?
I would 100% think they need a McLovin switch. They need whatever they can. This team has an identity crisis on defense. That zone defense I've seen better from Cole's high school basketball team, right? We're leaving three-point shooters open. That's exactly what the 2-3 zone does. And not only that, when they would try to triple team people in the paint, wide open shooters, you'll see a couple there. And if they were closing out well, then there were wide open looks in the paint. A player like Toby Fournier doesn't get 22 points if your defense is playing super well.
The ball movement today for Duke was so unbelievably crisp, it just torched the zone defense for Syracuse today. Too many three-pointers allowed for Syracuse, too many open shots. The zone defense was absolutely not the answer against the Duke offense. We just talked about they're not really an offensive team, but against the Syracuse defense, they absolutely had a great day today.
And I'm looking at those points in the paint too, 20 in the first half, 22 in the second half. Syracuse has a 6'4" center and Isa Verjao. That shouldn't be happening, but the scheme just allowed the Blue Devils to exploit every single matchup on the floor. That's why the Blue Devils were so dominant against this Orange defense.
And our player for the game in this one was none other than Toby Fournier, who had 22 points, went 8 for 12 at the free throw line, did a great job of being aggressive, getting to the line, and capitalizing for this Duke team in a big blowout win. Now, she is all around a great player here, as you can see. Butter. That midi is butter, and she was cooking Syracuse with that the whole game. So again, Toby Fournier, a great game for her and a showcase of sorts in what was a blowout win for the Duke Blue Devils. And when we come back, we're going to be thinking a little bit more big picture here on Orange Press Pass. Stay tuned as we look a little more macro.
Here you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I see you mobbing over her. Let's go. Let's mob. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, we mobbing. Come on, girl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl.
Welcome back to Orange Press Pass. Jish, Sokolsky, Purvis. I'm Srikar, Rajendran. Not at the desk anymore, up here at the wall, because now it's time to look beyond Syracuse's 80-49 loss to Duke, because look what's been happening around the hill. I mean, you look at one result here. I think Harvard and Syracuse and men's lacrosse going at it. That's a pretty bad loss for this program, and especially when you consider back-to-back losses for men's lacrosse.
A real shocking result where after the first 2 games of the season, Srikar, there were many who were saying this could be a national title contender. This is far from the team that it was in the preseason. I think Syracuse might be undefeated in hypothetical situations, but when they play tough teams like Maryland, like Harvard as they came to find, they kind of crumble under the pressure. It's a team that really needs to look at itself in the mirror and say, okay, what are championship contenders made of, and how can we get there? So far, I've only seen that against inferior opponents like Towson, Jacksonville, and Vermont.
Well, Jish, a lot of the national conversation right now is that Syracuse might be on fraud watch, and I think that's because of the poor goaltending. Ginny McCool was not effective yesterday. He was benched in the second half in that loss against Harvard. Back-to-back ranked losses. That's a really good Harvard team, but for a Syracuse team that's looking to be there at the top of the mountain at the end of the season, that's a really, really tough loss. And then over to the diamond, the Syracuse softball team has had an excellent start to their season. Best start in program history, in fact. Wow. They were 11-0 going into yesterday's game against Georgia. Unfortunately fell to the number 9 Bulldogs 8-2, but they played them again today and only lost 3-1. And for a Syracuse team that came into this season with extremely low expectations, 14th out of 15 in the ACC preseason coaches poll. Very tempered expectations for Coach Shannon Depking and her squad. They only lost 3-1 to Georgia today. That's the number 9 team in the country. That's pretty encouraging, if you ask me.
It sounds like you like this softball thing or something, Cole. Listen,
Big fan.
We've seen a ton of teams across the hill, volleyball, ice hockey, other teams really exceed expectations this year. So maybe while the women's basketball team and the men's basketball team have disappointed from years past, teams like softball, ice hockey, volleyball, even women's soccer had a really strong start to the season. So this is very encouraging that they only lost by that much to Georgia.
And looking even more macro, I mean, this team has some competition in the ACC itself. Look at that top left score right there. Number 13, NC State, takes down the number 1 team in the country in Notre Dame in overtime, no less. I mean, that's an absolute show right there.
Absolutely. Isaiah James and Zoe Brooks combining for 53 points for the Wolfpack. Huge result out of the ACC, double overtime to beat Hannah Hidalgo and the Fighting Irish. And then I look at the game right below that, a really fun matchup in the Big 12 between number 10 TCU and number 17 West Virginia. Player, maybe you've heard of her, Haley Van Lith, dropped 26 points for the Horned Frogs today en route to their 21-point victory.
Well, I thought Haley Van Lith was washed. That's what I was hearing after last year when she couldn't guard Caitlin Clark. Like, hey, newsflash, nobody can. Haley Van Lith now with the Horned Frogs, finally showing out. That's really great stuff for TCU, a program on the rise.
Now, fellas, we got to talk about the future of this SU team, and especially when it comes to the second unit, because we look at the discrepancies in this game. 39 bench points for Duke Only 15 for SU. Jish, what does SU need to do to get better play out of these reserves?
They need a consistent starting lineup. There is no reason why Syracuse should be tinkering with the pieces this much, especially this late in the season. There's no, oh, we need to experiment. Oh, we need to figure out what we got. You have who you have, and Syracuse just keeps playing with the lineup. When people don't have consistent roles, they can't get comfortable. And this Syracuse team just did not look comfortable at all today. So if players had more defined roles as starter, as a bench piece, I feel like there would be more bench production. But if everyone thinks they have a chance to start, if everyone wants to play that hard this late in the season, I'm sorry, you're not gonna, and you're gonna put up performances like this.
Agreed. The bench situation has been an absolute calamity this year for Syracuse. You look at some of the top point getters off of the bench this year: Kira Scott, Shai Hawkins, and Madeline Potts. Just too much tinkering with the starting lineup, as you mentioned. Really tough to build consistency when you're switching in and out the lineup as much as they have this season. It's just a sign of really dysfunction for a program that was good last year, but had a huge roster turnover this year, and the results have not been good.
Well, fellas, it's also hard to pinpoint who exactly the primary facilitator is for this SU offense. With no true point guard, Cole, do you have any ideas on who that could be? Because SU sure does need one.
Well, it's an interesting situation because you have Dominique Camp, who's the veteran. She's a senior. But then Olivia Schmidt had a season-high 9 points in the last game. It almost seemed like they're trying to pass her the torch at the point guard position. But today, just 3 points for the freshman. So we'll see if she can continue to make that transition, because it certainly was rough today. Inconsistency from her. She's a really scrappy player, very fun to watch. But I don't know if she's going to be the true point guard of the future.
Well, you can't win with just heart, with just scrappiness, Cole. Olivia Schmidt has to start facilitating. When Syracuse had a point guard like Kennedy Perkins last year, it worked because there was a scorer, there was a ball-dominant point guard. Look at these three: Dominique Camp, Angelica Velez, Olivia Schmidt. At least one of them is going to be gone next year. You welcome in someone like Camden Nelson. I'm more excited about the prospects next year. I think you really got to punt this position right now, because none of them, look at the points per game, none of them are averaging more than 5 points per game. Of course,
Jish,
Dominique Camp can dish, but
who do you think deserves that audition out of the three of them? Because while it is kind of, the season's kind of fading away, you still have to have some sort of time to see who you got and what you can roll into next year with.
If we're waving the white flag on this season, Srikar, you have to give Olivia Schmidt the nod going forward. And I believe that because she is just a freshman, getting those live reps against ACC opponents, that'll help her settle into a role next year, maybe as a backup point guard, maybe even as a starter if Camden Nelson isn't ready right away. But I think it has to be Olivia Schmidt. Dominique Camp is on her way out. Thank you for all you've done for the program. And Angelica Velez, we haven't really seen a ton that is encouraging with her, that gives you a sign of hope moving forward.
You have to look at upside. And like you said, Olivia Schmidt, just a freshman. I think you have to give her the nod, or potentially go to the transfer portal if you don't believe in her as your point guard of the future. So there are a couple of options, but it's not a position to really feel great about for Syracuse. Of course, you have Georgia Woolley, who's more of a 2 guard this year. That point guard position has been really, really inconsistent for the Orange.
And finally, just one more quick big picture question here. We've always talked about who is going to be that secondary scorer outside of Georgia Woolley, and I guess Sophie Burrows in ways has come up as that player, but do you think any other candidates for that spot primarily? Who can be another producer on this team?
We're talking about this year?
Yeah.
This
and
year,
maybe even going into next year.
Well, this year it's got to be Sophie Burrows. In fact, I could argue that she's the primary point getter on many nights. Not today. She was only 1 point behind Georgia Woolley with 13 points. But Sophie Burrows has the range, has the size to work her way inside, gets offensive rebounds, taps it back in. Sophie Burrows would be my pick.
Yeah, and you have to look at the paint production. Sophie Burrows is probably the second best scorer on this team. But I think if you had to do this season over for Syracuse, you would put more of an emphasis on scoring in the paint. So players like Izzy Varejao and Kyra Wood need more production for this team. And if they can step up and be that second scorer alongside Georgia Woolley, I think things are looking good for the Orange.
Well, time is slowly fading away on this Syracuse women's basketball season, and also on Orange Press Pass for us. We're wrapping up shop here, but when we're back, we're going to be looking one last time at what's going on in the ACC, and then our analysts are going to sound off. Stay tuned.
You've messed up your son's haircut.
Mom?
Do you A, try to fix it,
Like it never happened.
B, work with what you got, Or C, show solidarity?
Thank you, baby.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
Welcome back to Orange Press Pass alongside Jish, Sokolsky, and Cole Purvis. I'm Srikar, Rajendran. Now, we're slowly wrapping up shop here, but still breaking down Syracuse women's basketball's 80-49 loss to number 11 Duke. But if we look even bigger picture, I know we did that last time, but now the ACC kind of in flux, especially with the number 1 team in the country going down, Jish.
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with Syracuse. Scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. Oh, Syracuse is what, 5th to last, probably going down even further, but with matchups against some of the bottom teams like Pittsburgh coming up, Boston College, those are going to be big games if Syracuse wants to sneak into this ACC tournament.
It's a pretty wacky conference when you look at how top-heavy it is. You have ranked squads like Duke, North Carolina. Notre Dame is the number 1 team in the country, although they did fall today. And then you look at the bottom. We talked about that Boston College blowout win over Syracuse, and the Orange will have to face the Eagles once more this season. That's going to be huge for ACC tournament implications. And Pitt dominated BC as well this season. So when you look at the common opponents, Syracuse has to play the Panthers as well. Those are 2 games they're really going to have to win, but I don't know if they can do it with the current state of this team.
Now, I've done my due diligence. I've said my piece, that's for sure. But now it's time for our analysts to sound off.
As we've talked about so many times on this show, we talk about that 41-point loss to Boston College. In that game, Syracuse was missing Georgia Woolley. Okay, that's a surprise wrench in the program. You're not prepared for that. Today, Georgia Woolley played. Today, Sophie Burrows played. Today, Kyra Wood played. And you still lose by 31 to Duke. There's no more excuses for this team. In my eyes, the season's already over. Who cares about the ACC tournament? Who cares about an NCAA tournament? That's a pipe dream, Cole. This team has no more excuses and should start looking to next year, because right now it's a pitiful watch. It's a pitiful team to break down, and I'm honestly excited for the season to be over.
When I look at this team, I think that the public view of Coach Felicia Leggett-Jack could change very quickly. She's a fan favorite. She's a Syracuse graduate. She has her name up in the rafters. But winning is the end-all, be-all, and this is a fan base that has been restless over the past couple of years. The men's team has had a little bit of a drought in terms of making the NCAA tournament, and the women's team has been pretty atrocious this year. So I think while she's allowed 1 stinker year, and this is her stinker year, but if she comes back next year and does the same thing with this team and doesn't win a whole lot of games, I think it's going to get loud from the Syracuse faithful. So I think that her job, it's not in trouble now, but if she replicates this next year, it could be, and the public view of Felicia Leggett-Jack could certainly change quickly.
And before we say goodbye here on Orange Press Pass, let's take a look ahead as to what's next on Orange Press Pass. Syracuse men's basketball takes on NC State in what should be quite an interesting game. Syracuse, another team that's floundering in ACC play. Just like the women's team, the men's team is as well.
Yeah, but this NC State game is winnable, and one Syracuse has to win if it wants to hang on to its 15th spot in the ACC.
Absolutely, and this NC State team has not had a good year despite being in the Final Four last year. But Syracuse lost to Miami, the bottom team in the ACC, so really no game is a given right now for the Orange.
For sure, and I also think this game could be a good chance to get back on the right track, just like you said, Jish, but obviously, it's kind of a wait and see thing with Syracuse men's basketball and Syracuse women's basketball. We want to thank you for tuning in with us for this breakdown of Syracuse women's basketball's 80-49 loss to number 11 Duke. Now, obviously, it was a blowout, but there still was quite a lot to talk about. Thank you for joining us for our entire production team, Jish, Sokolsky, and Cole Purvis. I'm Srikar Rajendran saying so long and see you next time on Orange Press Pass.